how to use Tag Junior, or for that matter, the full version of Tag, to help you do simple conversions. When you're knitting from a pattern, I found that the pattern often just gives you, if you look really hard for it, it might, in some cases, give you what the stitch and row gauge is that these instructions are in. But sometimes they just tell you to use a certain needle and yarn, as you know. But anyway, you look on the pattern and find what gauge they're talking about as they create this piece. So if they said on the pattern that it was 25 stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimeters, you set the gauge in manually. Now the pattern often says cast on 100 stitches. So what we can do is adjust the top tape here, because it's representing our stitches in width. Adjust it to 100 stitches, and we can find out from that that this piece is going to be 16 inches wide. Okay? But for whatever reason, we want to use a different gauge, but we want the pattern to come out the same dimensions. So if we want to have 16 inches now, we know that they want to give us 100 rows, but that's not going to work because we're at a different gauge. So we put in our gauge, which might be 20 stitches per 4 inches and 10 centimeters. Click the button, and we find out that that 16 inches is 80 stitches. So the same 16 inches in one gauge requires 100 stitches, and in our gauge requires 80. There. Now, as you can guess, rows are no different. If the pattern calls for 30 rows per, right here we're set at 30 rows per 4 inches or 10 centimeters, we adjust. The pattern calls for 100 rows. We'd like to know how long that's going to be before we knit it. And at least what their pattern is saying, that this is going to be 13 3/8 inches deep. Go in, change it to what our gauge is that we measured using Tag Junior's other function, the first function, the swatch. And we found out that our row gauge is 25 per 4 inches. So now we find out that 13 3/8 inches only requires 83 rows. So that did your conversion. So instead of doing 100 rows at their gauge, you do 83 rows at your own gauge. And that's a little, hopefully, clue as to how to do simple conversions with Tag Junior.